Good morning, everyone. Thomas Hyman here, founder and CEO of Realty Partners, and welcome to this week's team meeting. So this meeting is going to be broadcast live on YouTube. We're trying something new. Today's training session is on condominiums, which really I think is something that every real estate agent in the state of Florida will find interesting. And we are doing these meetings every Monday morning for our company. Normally we publish them on our internal Facebook workplace group, but I decided to broadcast this one here on YouTube on our channel. So if you're a subscriber on our YouTube channel, then you will obviously receive the notification. I'm bringing on our team members, promoting them to panelists. Good morning, everyone. If you are going to talk, please unmute yourself. And if you're not talking, please keep yourself muted so we don't have any feedback loops here. Good morning, Sparky. Good morning, Tanya. And let's just let things roll in here. Got a few more people coming on board. Fantastic. So how's everyone doing this morning? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, morning, Thomas. Doing well.
All right, fantastic.
Good morning.
So glad to see you all on here, and I'm sure there'll be some more people trickling in. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, obviously. And so I'm going to cover a couple of things today. The first one is going to be our training topic, which is related to condominiums. So you'll all find that very interesting, I think. Without exaggeration, 4 out of 5 transactions that I see is having some issues with that. And this is probably an area of huge potential liability if you don't have your I's dotted and T's crossed. And so I'm going to cover that first. So in case you have to run early, you don't have to stick around. After that, I'm going to announce a couple of changes to our mentoring and new agent program. This is only going to affect new agents joining forward. So it doesn't affect anyone that is part of the company right now. And then also I'm just going to talk briefly about our team meeting coming up October 1st in Clearwater at the new location that Sandy and Jennifer and their team have set up. And we'll have something very exciting happening there for those that will attend in person. So all I can say is you've been told, and if you decide that it's not worth the drive, well, what can I say? So let's shift gears. And somebody sent me a chat message. Thanks, Nolan. Yep, he hears me. Very good. So let's shift gears, and I'm going to share my screen. And by the way, this is being broadcast live on our YouTube channel, which also allows us then later to download the video. And we're going to post the video on the internal training team meeting group as well. So you'll have access to that. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And by the way, during the presentation, during the training, if you have any questions, post a chat message. I'll try to look at it, or just unmute yourself and ask me if there's something that you don't understand or something is not clear. So as I'm getting started, let me guys ask you first of all this. There's this wonderful right of rescission period with respect to condominiums, right? So how many days is it? Don't be afraid.
It varies if it's new construction, right, and or to a repurchase.
Okay, so what is it for either one?
3 days for the non-new construction, and I think the other one's 15 days. I always have to look it up.
Okay, very good, very good. So, and actually you're accurate. It's, if it's a non-developer selling the condominium, it's 3 days. If it's a developer selling the condominium, it's 15 days. And there's one big caveat with that right of rescission. And who knows what that is? Because it's not automatic.
The, oh, I guess I don't know. Oh, when they get their docs, they have to get their docs. Otherwise, it really does. The clock doesn't start ticking until they get those condominium docs.
Okay, that's what you would think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the first thing, and I'm going to go over that in when we look at the documents here in a minute. The 3-day right of rescission on a non-developer purchase only applies if the buyer requests the documents in writing, okay? So for all of those of you that are writing contracts on condominiums where the buyer is not specifically requesting to get those documents, there is no right of rescission, okay? And the document has to be requested at the time the contract was written. So you can't come like a week later, oh shoot, darn, we forgot, you know, I should ask for the documents and we didn't. And guess what happens if there is a conflict and you didn't counsel the buyer, maybe provided the wrong documentation, and they didn't request the documents in writing, and so they have no right of rescission, and they think they have a 3-day right of rescission, and now the deal goes sideways. Well, guess what? You'll be sued because you were negligent. And that means, of course, we get sued, the company gets sued, I get sued. So there are really 2 key challenges. Well, I mean, 3 key challenges with condominiums. I'm going to go over all of them. The first one is using the wrong documentation, okay? Not using the condominium rider. The second issue is not requesting the documents in writing, okay? I just had a contract come across my desk, and I will not mention any names, but on that contract, the box was checked that states that the buyer is not requesting any documents. I mean, I don't know why anyone would ever do that. So, you know, not requesting documents is a big challenge because you have no right of rescission. And the third big challenge that I see a lot is that agents have their buyer sign a receipt for condo docs when the buyer really did not receive all of the condo docs, okay? And so we'll go over all of these here, and so I'm going to share my screen because, again, these are very, very important aspects. Number one, you have to protect your customer, and number two, you also want to make sure that you protect yourself and us, the company, because this is really an area of huge liability. You know, when somebody thinks they have a right of rescission, they should have had a right of rescission, and then they don't. Or somebody's given a bunch of documents and they're told, here are your condo docs, sign the receipt, you have your 3-day right of rescission, and the buyer looks at the documents, everything looks fine, but it turns out they are really not the documents. And then later, you know, they have an issue and it's like, well, why the hell didn't you give me the condo docs? Why did you make me sign a receipt for the condo docs when I didn't get the condo docs? So let's walk through this here. And pardon me, still recovering from my cold. So here we have a regular purchase document, a contract for residential sale and purchase, and it's the same with an as-is contract or regular contract. You know, down here you have section 20, the addenda, the documents that are attached to the contract, and here you have a document called condominium association. Down here is a homeowners association. And then you have a bunch of other things, and then you could put other there, okay? This thing here, condominium association, is a little bit misleading to a lot of people because they think, okay, I'm having a condominium disclosure document here. It doesn't say condominium association rider, it just says condominium association. And so as a result, what I see, literally 4 out of 5 transactions, is in essence just a property disclosure document. And agents think that it's a rider, okay? So we have a couple of documents here. This here is a HOA community disclosure, which of course we use with a homeowners association. We don't use that with a condominium, okay? And there's no right of rescission with an HOA, of course, but you have to provide this disclosure. If you don't provide the disclosure and there's an HOA, then, you know, legally the buyer has the right to cancel all the way up to closing if this is not provided, you know. So you want to provide this for sure. Some condominiums also have an HOA. So here in Sarasota, for example, we have communities like Lakewood Ranch or Turtle Rock. And these are large planned master associations that also have a condominium. So you want to be very careful here because many times in these large master associations, you have a condominium, but you also have an HOA. So you really need to have both of those disclosures, okay? Very important. And also, you know, the fees that are associated with that. But if there's an HOA, in addition to the condominium, you want to do the HOA disclosure. If there's a CDD on top of it, make sure you put in a CDD disclosure. And then we have this document here that 4 to 5 times the realtor uses thinking that this is the condo rider. And I've literally had many, many instances where I send a note back in .loop and say, hey, you're missing the condo rider. And the answer I get back is like, no, there is the condo rider. Here it is. And I'm like, no, this is not a condo rider. It is a seller's property disclosure, you know? So the seller property disclosure condominium, it's misleading in a sense, or it's easy to misunderstand because there are questions in there that deal with the condominium as far as, you know, that the thing is in a condominium. And you obviously want to get this if it's available, but the key document that you want is the condominium association disclosure rider, okay? And here's where it gets tricky. How many of you, I'm just curious by a show of hand, would, if there is no seller's property disclosure, go ahead and how many of you would go ahead and just complete a seller's property disclosure and then send it to, have the buyer sign it and then send it to the seller for the seller to sign? I'm just curious. How many of you would do that by a show of hands? I hope nobody's raising their hands. I'm going to scroll through all of you here. Better not raise your hands. Okay. Well, that is exactly what a lot of agents are doing. Okay. So, so let's say you're ready to write an offer on a condominium and you go in the MLS and there's no condo rider, not a condominium association disclosure, seller disclosure, but a condominium rider. And it says comprehensive rider. If there is none in the MLS, you know, some agents are lazy, they don't upload their documents. Obviously, what you do, you call the agent and have them send you that condo rider. So your buyer has that rider. You know, this rider needs to be completed by the seller first because the buyer is going to acknowledge the information that is on here, just like with a lead-based paint warning. You know, the seller needs to complete that lead-based paint disclosure statement first, and then the buyer acknowledges receipt. And so let's take a look at some of the stuff that's in here that is so important, that the buyer would have no idea if the seller didn't complete this first and submit it to the buyer. So the first question here is condo association approval. You know, is there an approval required? How much time do we have for an approval? Okay. If you have a situation where condominium requires approval and it takes 60 days to get that approval, which with high-end condominiums, many times is the case because, you know, they're just slow to move, and you have a cash deal that closes in 15 days, you got a problem, you know. I've seen buyers lose their deposit on condominium transactions where there was no writer that disclosed these things properly. You know, if approval is required, the buyer cannot close on that transaction without that approval being in hand. Right of first refusal. Many condominium associations have a right of first refusal where either the association has a right of first refusal, meaning if you own a condo and you're going to sell it, that association has a right of first refusal and they have the right to buy it first. And some of them, you know, the association doesn't have a right of first refusal, but the other owners there have a right of first refusal, you know? So, I mean, what is a condominium really? A condominium is a collective in essence, where you have a group of people, a corporation that is formed, the association in essence that owns the land, that owns the structure, and then you join that association and you basically buy the airspace inside of your unit, but everything else is, you know, owned by the association, and which is very different from a co-op. Co-ops are fairly rare here in Florida. They're very, very common in New York. In a co-op, you're actually buying a share in that corporation that owns everything. So you don't own a unit in a co-op, you own a share in that corporation and you have a unit assigned to you as part of that shareholder ownership. So this is very important. If there's a right of first refusal, what are the terms, how much time has to be given? Then we have the assessments, you know, what assessments are payable. And many times there's more than one association. Sometimes they're recreation areas, sometimes there are different dues for, you know, boat docks or what have you not. So it has to be spelled out here. You can't just count on what's in the MLS. You know, a lot of times, honestly, agents take a listing and they're just too lazy to gather the information themselves, and they'll just pull up the listing from when it was listed last time in the MLS and copy all that information. And so as a result, you have things propagating many times through the MLS listing that is just erroneous, you know? So you want to make sure that you get this here signed, because if they disclose something that is not correct, then of course there's a problem. Take a look at this here. If property is part of a homeowners association, see rider B, homeowners association community disclosure. So it tells you there in bold letters, if there is an HOA, you got to get that other HOA disclosure as well. So this here does not cover HOAs. You know, down here is multiple association. Well, this is multiple assessments. Some condominiums have multiple assessments, but it's not talking about HOAs. If there's an HOA, don't list that here. It would go on an HOA disclosure. Special assessments, prorations, who pays what, litigation. Is there any litigation going on right now that the buyer doesn't know? You know, it needs to be disclosed here. Sprinkler system. Here, very important now, non-developer disclosure. A, the buyer here acknowledges that buyer has been provided a current copy of the declaration, yada, yada, yada. More than 3 days, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays, prior to execution of the contract. So if you get all the condominium documents at least 3 days before this was signed, then you check that box. If the buyer is getting all the documents at the time the offer is written, you don't sign that, because the buyer still has a 3-day right of rescission from the time that the documents delivered and the contract is executed. And then B, other option, this agreement is voidable by buyer, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just going down to the very end. Super important. If requested in writing. Okay? So if it's not requested in writing, the buyer has zero right of rescission. Okay? So very, very important. So you want to have your person check one of these two boxes. And while we're on the subject, let's look at what is required really here. So we have the declaration, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws and rules of the association, which, by the way, those things may have been amended many times, and a copy of the most recent year-end financial information and frequently asked questions and answer document. So what I see a lot is that, you know, Sally Sue and her husband bought this condominium 12 years ago, and now they're listing that condominium for sale, and they're too stingy to go and cut a check to their association to get an updated set of documents. So they're just going to hand their documents to the agent, okay? And many times the agent isn't even aware enough to look at the damn financials and realize, oh shoot, the financial statement in here is a decade old, you know? But they'll just take it, okay, here are the condo docs, and then when there's a buyer, they'll hand those condo docs to the buyer, and the buyer agent signs off on the receipt, and it's complete crap, pardon my French. The documents are 12 years old. Most likely the rules and bylaws have been amended since then. The financial statement is not the most recent right now. It's September 17th, 2018. Most recent financial would be year end, December 31st, 2017, not 16, 15, or 2010. And so unless you have all of that, you don't have the actual documents. And personally, if I were to work with a seller, I would contact the association and get a current set of all those documents. And I would tell the seller, it's the seller's responsibility to provide those. I would have them pay for it, obviously, and make sure that you have them so you can provide them to the buyer in an expedient fashion, so you don't lose a week or two requesting those documents from the association at that point. And if I were to work with a buyer, I would want to make sure that those documents are, in fact, the most recent documents. Okay, Mr. Listing Agent, when did you get these documents from your association? Okay, and I would contact the association and say, hey, can you confirm to me in writing that there have been no changes made to your rules, your bylaws, your question and answer sheet, et cetera, since whatever the date is that the agent tells you the stuff was issued, and it should have a date on there somewhere. So very, very important that you make sure you actually have the right documents. In most cases, this is really sad, but it's true. In most cases, the buyer agent is not making sure that the documents are actually the most recent documents, okay? And especially the financials are so critical. If you're running into a situation, for example, where the association is hugely in debt, and then all of a sudden a year later you get hit with this special assessment for $25,000 because there are no reserves, that could have consequences if you had the buyer sign off on documents that you were presented to them are the documents that they're entitled to, but they weren't. Also, as a side note, when you're working with a buyer that is going to buy a condominium, make sure that you check with the lender, if the buyer has a lender, whether or not the lender will finance in that condominium. Ever since the big crash of 2007, 2008, 2009, where most condominiums were just destroyed, literally, because most of the people that owned in there were speculators and investors, people buying into these condo conversions, or buying into condominiums to do a quick flip because everything was going up, up, up. And then, of course, all of a sudden, nobody was paying their association dues. And you literally had associations where 90+% of the owners were investors in foreclosure with no revenue generated. So as a result, a couple of things happened. There are some very few associations that will have very, very strict requirements in terms of investor percentage, percentage of investor ownership. But there are also, more importantly, a lot of lenders that have, it's almost like a blacklist of condominiums that they will not finance because those condominiums have a very high percentage of non-occupant owners. And so you want to make sure that you cover that with your lender. One of our agents right now is having an issue where, the lender wants to get a certification, and the condominium is not required to provide a certification that will potentially put the condominium at risk of liability. And it's a problem, So make sure that your buyer is pre-approved by a serious lender, number one. And number two, when you get ready to write an offer on AYC condominium, you pick up that phone and talk to that lender and say, hey, are there any issues with that condominium? Or better yet, have them give you a list of condominiums that are a problem in your market area. And they will do that. They have lists of condominiums where they will not do loans or where they will require a higher down payment or whatever the situation may be. And so make sure that you check on that. So now number 6 here, very important, buyer's request for documents. So this is the request for condominium documents. And guess what? You got to check one of those two. I've seen a lot of these things where nothing was checked off, okay? And so what does that mean? That they requested it, they didn't request it? Well, if they didn't check off the box, who knows, So you want to make sure that this box is checked, that the buyer requests the documents. And I don't know why anyone would ever check this here, The buyer does not request a current copy of the documents. If you have a buyer that does that, against better judgment, make sure you have them initial on the side here, just so there's no issue about it ever where somebody comes back later and says, oh, I didn't check that. My agent checked that. My agent just told me to sign, and so that would be a problem. And then the rest is, here's the buyer's receipt of documents. If the buyer received the documents at least 3 days prior to writing the offer, then you would put the date here when they received it. And this would basically act as a receipt for the condominium documents. Common elements, parking, what are the assigned spaces and so forth, inspection and repairs. So it's very, very important that this rider is provided if you have a buyer for a condominium, and if you take a listing, make sure that you get this here completed and upload it into the MLS so the buyer has it. If you get an offer on your condo listing and it does not have the rider, then I would say to the person, we need that, here's the rider, the buyer needs to complete the rider. It's part of the contract. It needs to be referenced in the contract. Very, very important. And then last but not least is the condo receipt here, which you would never, ever, ever have your buyer sign unless the buyer has all of the documents that they sign off on, that they received. So the 3-day right of rescission on resale starts when this is signed, basically. And again, I see a lot of agents that just have their buyers sign this thing, and the agent doesn't even know what is required. I've seen so many things where there's just a declaration and that some old articles and bylaws and the year-end financial statement. Here are the condo docs. No, it's not. There's a bunch of stuff missing, So you want to make sure that there's accuracy, because when it's a he said, she said in a lawsuit, you could say, well, the buyer signed it and the buyer completed it, blah, blah, blah. But the buyer's going to say, you know what, I didn't know what I signed. My agent just gave this to me. They said initial here, sign here. And you know what, you're at fault. Bottom line, you know, the court is going to side with the buyer. So it's just a big issue. So on this note, let me open it up, and any questions, thoughts that any of you have with respect to this. Go ahead and just unmute yourself, and let's open the floor.
This is David.
Hi, David.
I have a house that probably going to go to contract, and I took it over from another broker. So there were existing seller disclosure documents, and they're dated June. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if that is a proper representation by the seller on what the current conditions are. It has this June date on it. Should she re-sign that, or is that okay the way it is as long as the buyer accepts it?
Well,
I mean, you can have this with a condo too. This is a single family.
So if you run into that situation, I mean, first of all, I would always have the seller fill out either a new seller's property disclosure when you take the listing, or have them, because it really looks very bad when you take when you send your documents to the buyer agent and it has a seller property disclosure with the logo of another broker on it, you know. So I mean, that's for starters. But the second thing is it's dated. So if you want to reuse the disclosure that's there, I would have the seller date it by hand, re-sign it. And there's, you know, that update page that the seller can note any updates that have happened since then, because a lot of stuff can happen in a couple of months. You know, there could have been a leak in the roof or some other thing that needs to be disclosed. So just to cover yourself, I would have the seller date it and re-sign it, just to reconfirm that everything is the way it used to be.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Anything regarding condominiums? Any thoughts?
My experience with condos, I did one condo this year. I don't do a lot of them. And thank God for Tanya to get me through all of that process, because I was, it gets very confusing for somebody that just does single family homes when you get under the pressure of trying to get a deal closed. So, you know, really, I immediately turned it over to Tanya, and she cleared the way for me. So I recommend that if you're not sure about what to do next,
okay,
I would rely on the transaction coordination availability we have in the company.
Great tip, great tip. And I absolutely recommend, if you're not familiar with it or you want help with it, take a look at Real Estate Help Team. So somebody just texted in here, Susan Proctor. When the listing agent requires HOA and condo rider, when there is no HOA, how do you handle that? Well, Susan, why don't you unmute yourself and let's talk about this. Are you there, Susan? There you are. Hold on. You're muted. Let me unmute you, Susan. Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Sorry, I couldn't find myself on the screen.
Okay. So what do you mean specifically? So when the listing agent requires HOA and condo rider, what?
I sell a lot of condos, and
yep.
I've had a lot of listing agents tell me they had to have the HOA when there is no HOA on the condo.
Okay.
So,
well, here's the thing. I mean, first of all, the buyer agent never, or the buyer should never provide any of these disclosures. You know, I mean, the listing agent is the one that needs to provide the buyer with the condo disclosure completed by the seller.
No, they are. Yeah, it's the listing agent. They're giving me both of the documents, but both of the documents, it's only a condo. It's no HOA.
Okay. So, well, here's the thing. If there is no homeowners association disclosure, then, but they provide you with a HOA disclosure, and the HOA listed is the name of the condominium, and it's basically said, you know, XYZ condominium, and it's just redundant, then, you know, you got to pick your battles. You know, you can either say, you know what, there is no HOA. And if they're you know, insistent, you could say, you know what, let me have a talk to your broker, because obviously you need some training. Or, you know, or you can go ahead and just sign it, as long as the HOA disclosure clearly identifies this as that condominium, and it's the same amount of association fees and so forth. I don't see any harm at it, you know.
Okay.
But, hope that answers your question. Okay, from Tanya to everyone. And yes, if you're not talking, make sure you mute yourself, because we get these feedback loops. And if you want to talk, just unmute yourself. All right, anyone else? Any other questions regarding HOAs or regarding anything for that matter? It's open floor. So
hey, Tom, Sparky here. I sold a couple of condominiums, and one thing that I learned is you got to look at the MLS document, because a lot of times they have attachments in there that do these things, and if you overlook them, then you're missing the boat also.
Mm-hmm. Good point. I mean, and again, most agents are conscientious. They upload all these documents into the document tab in the MLS. And what I would do personally, I mean, I'm not selling real estate now, but I bought a bunch of real estate for myself. So the first thing I would do is, when you have a property that somebody is interested in making an offer on, is go to the attachment tab in the MLS and Matrix and see, are there any attachments? Okay. If there are any attachments, obviously download them, because you may need them. And if it's a condominium and there is no condominium rider, or if it's a HOA and there's no homeowners association disclosure documents, or if it's a condominium that's in an HOA, which, by the way, you as a professional should know whether or not it is. Believe me, many times the listing agent may not know. So I would call the HOA and say, hey, you know, are you, the condominium association, and say, hey, are you part of any other associations, you know? But if something is missing, then the first thing I would do is call the listing agent and say, hey, this is Thomas Hyman, Realty Partner. I have a buyer here with me, and we're looking to make an offer on your listing. And could you please email me a copy of the seller's disclosure, the HOA disclosure, the condominium rider, whatever it may be, okay? Now, if they send you a seller's disclosure for condominium as the condominium rider, then I would say this is not a condominium rider. And if they're completely ignorant, then I would send them the blank condominium rider to have it completed by their seller, so they can send it to you, because you really cannot in good faith write an offer on a condominium where you have no clue what the different issues at hand are, you know, and you can't guess it and put it in there and have your buyer sign off on it and then hope that the seller signs off on it. So you just want to be diligent ahead of writing an offer. You know, sometimes people get so excited, you have a buyer, they're ready to make an offer, and you just whip it together and sign off on it without making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And this is really one of those areas where you can create value for yourself. You know, I would sit down with the buyer, I would explain to them the nuances of condominiums and why we need to get what we need to get and so forth. And believe me, they'll appreciate that. All right, anyone else?
I have.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right, I'll go. Sorry, my camera's not working again this morning. I just wanted to put out there that the help team, we should, every time after I help somebody with a condo, I always think we should get paid more, but we do not. So we do help gather all these documents for the buyers and get on the listing agent to try to collect everything we need. So we do help agents with our transaction coordination with condos.
And so I'm curious, Tanya, how many times do you run into issues where, you know, they provide you documents that are really not all the documents or outdated documents or what have you not?
I've never seen a clean closing yet with a condo. I kid you not, never. I have never seen where the listing agent has all those papers ready to go and just hands them to you in a nice, neat pile. I've gone through entire transactions with agents. We never got all of them, and we kept on those agents the entire time requesting, not giving the buyer's receipt, doing everything we were supposed to, and which is, comes to the end of the transaction, and the buyer, is educated, does know that they're missing those documentations, and goes ahead with the sale, but it's not from our lack of trying.
Yeah. So, the right of rescission obviously terminates at the closing. And, here's an opportunity for yourself. If you establish yourself as a real estate professional, and I presume now that everyone here on this call and everyone watching this is, looking at this as a serious profession, they want to be considered a serious real estate professional. And so one of the easiest things that you can do is you can go ahead and set yourself apart in the minds of everyone else by being super organized and having everything ready, So if you're a buyer agent and you actually have a listing agent that has all that stuff nicely together, up to date, boom, without any kind of delays or hiccups or what have you not, that sticks with you in your mind. It's like, wow, they really got their act together, as opposed to being the kind of agent that doesn't have anything. And then you try to get it, and then you talk to the seller, and the seller says, here's all the stuff, but it's not the stuff because it's 10 years old. And then, and it just makes the whole thing very sloppy and unprofessional. And of course, keep in mind that the buyer has that right of rescission. So what if the buyer learns about another condo in the same building, maybe even updated for the same price or less, or some other opportunity comes along, 1 week before closing, and they'll just walk, So you want to make sure, obviously, for yourself, your own commission, and also for the seller's sake, that when you have a deal, that deal is solid, not something that is going to fritter away at the last minute. It just kills me when I see these transactions going sideways, literally within a week before closing, sometimes within days. And all of these issues could have been totally avoided. These are not inspection period, buyer decides they don't like the results. These are, buyer wasn't really qualified, didn't have a solid approval. And now all of a sudden something comes up and they can't get the loan, that type of stuff. So anyhow, on to you, Rick. Go ahead.
I just went through this yesterday. An agent over in Riviera Dunes was, he gave me the original documents, articles of a corporation and all that. And he says, well, you can go take that information off another listing. He said it was in another building. I said, oh, anyway, it was funny. Actually, it wasn't funny. It was scary that he would suggest that. I said, the liability you are putting yourself in. And I said, no. So I made sure that he went ahead and went into HomeWise or whatever that association was and get the original documents. But he says, well, the buyer will never read the documents anyway. I said, that doesn't matter. I'm going to suggest that my buyer reads it. And I'm actually going to send an email suggesting that my buyer reads it, just handing it over. Sometimes, okay, they got the information, but a few months later, they say, well, I didn't know that this association was going to require this, or I couldn't have a dog or whatever. Yeah. So it's very important that we make sure that the buyer does read it as well, or at least make sure we tell them to read it.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's super, super dangerous to copy anything from the MLS because things change all the time. I mean, let's say the property was sold or the identical unit in the same building, one door down, was sold a year ago. And, they changed the rules. Every quarter they have a damn meeting, So now all of a sudden, instead of a 35-pound dog, you can only have a 15-pound dog. Or instead of 2 pets, you can only have 1 pet. Or instead of being able to rent 26 times a year, now you can only rent twice a year. And so these changes happen all the time, especially with condominiums, also with HOAs. You got to be, recommend to your buyer to find out what the rules and regs are with the HOA, even though there's no legal requirement for the seller to provide that. The buyer should contact the HOA and get the set of the current rules. But on a condominium, for sure, so it's really, really critical that you always get firsthand information, And whatever you do, when you take a listing, it doesn't matter what's in the MLS for that house or the house next door. It's completely irrelevant because, you know, your butt is on the line. And when you fill out that MLS data entry sheet and just have your buyer, so your seller sign off on it, you know, the liability is with you. So good share, Rick. Thank you.
Thomas?
Yes.
This is Beth. I just wanted to bring up that you have to also, for lending purposes, have a condo questionnaire filled out. So you may want to tell your buyer that there may be a fee for that also, but the lender will need that.
Well, and again, this comes back to what I said earlier. You want to make sure that you get a list from the lender with respect to what condominiums in the area are problem condominiums that require certain things. And that questionnaire that you're referring to, you know, remember there's zero legal obligation for the association to complete any kind of questionnaire other than what's in the legally required in the Florida Condominium Act, the documents that they have to provide. Why would some condominium not even want to ever, under any circumstances, provide a questionnaire? Well, let's say there's a question in there that says, what is your percentage of investor ownership? And the association doesn't know. Maybe they think it's 55%, but then it turns out later that it really was 70%, and the buyer's loan goes into foreclosure, and the lender is now clawing back at the association and suing the association because they made a false statement on that certification. You know, the whole word certification is already a word, you know, fraught with issues. So just be aware of that. If a condominium is a challenged condominium, then you know what I would do as an agent is I would, because this is not the seller's responsibility. The seller could care less. It's the buyer's responsibility. So I would, you know, I would call the association myself. Listen, I have a buyer here. They're an owner occupant, or there are an absentee owner, whatever the hell they are, and their lender requires this questionnaire. What is the process for getting that, and how much is it going to be? You know, and in 99.9% of all issues, it's a matter of cost. You know, the association, they don't mind doing it if they get paid for it, and it's the buyer's responsibility to pay for it. They don't like it, they need to get a different lender or buy somewhere else. And again, just keep that in mind, that the association is not under any legal obligation to provide that type of questionnaire. But it's a good point, Beth, and you really have to look out for that. You know, when you work with a buyer that wants to buy a condominium, you just have to be very, very, very proactive. You don't want to wait until, you know, 1 week before closing to have this stuff sprung on you, you know, and keep in mind, many title companies and many mortgage companies are very last minute. You know, they're not very proactive. We partner with a couple of them, Yvette Claremont and Frank Weigel, that are very proactive, but most of them are not. You know, they're getting someone pre-approved based on the credit score, and nothing happens until the thing goes into underwriting. And when it goes into underwriting, usually with many of them, nothing happens until, you know, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks prior to closing, sometimes even less. And so a lot of these issues may not even come up to the forefront until the underwriter then tells their mortgage broker that, okay, here are the requirements. We need to get this document, whatever it is, you know. So just keep that in mind and be proactive on it. But good point, Beth. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Nope. Okay, so obviously you message me on Workplace if you have any other questions regarding this. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm not checking right now, but post any questions, comments you have, and I will go in there and answer them for you. Even if you're with another company, it doesn't matter. Now keep in mind, we're in Florida here, so if you're watching this in another state, every state has different rules. So let's just shift gears real quick. A couple of announcements as we're wrapping this up. The first one is related to the new agent / inexperienced agents program that we're bringing on board. You know, up until this point, the requirement was that somebody must have done 3 transactions in the last 12 months, and in order to be able to join the company, If they have done, fewer than that, they have to get a mentor, and we'll try to find them a mentor, and then the mentor try to figure out what they charge for it. Some charge, some don't. So we're making a change to that. And moving forward, the requirement is changing to 5 transactions in the past 2 years. So instead of 3 transactions the past year, it's going to 5 transactions in the past 2 years, because we've gotten a lot of feedback from agents that, took a break, but they've done a lot of transactions, but just not in the last 12 months. So if somebody has done 5 or less transactions in the past 2 years, in other words, fewer than 6, then they need to have a mentor. And we're going to create a list of mentors. And if you're interested in mentoring in your experience, I'll invite you to register yourself on Workplace. And when an agent joins under the mentoring program as a novice, they will be charged 10% on their first 5 transactions with Realty Partners, and that 10% goes to their mentor. So if you are going to mentor a new agent or an inexperienced agent, we obviously want to compensate you for that. So that's the first thing. And I'm going to send something out about that after the meeting here. The second thing I want to talk about is with respect to the meeting next month. So October 1st, we're going to meet in Clearwater, and I send out a calendar request to everyone, and we're going to post it on Workplace as well when we get within a week. But Sandy and Jennifer and the team, they have set up an office in Clearwater. And so we're going to have the team meeting there. It's going to be our very first time there. The office is being registered as a branch office. It'll be done in the next couple of days. And if you are looking to utilize that office, I know that they have desk space, hot desk type of space that they can rent if you're looking for space. Also, they have meeting rooms there. I think they have several meeting rooms. And if you're interested, again, reach out to them. And Sandy or Jennifer, if you're online right now, you want to just hop in real quick and address this and tell them how they can reach you best? No? I know Sandy's here, but she's muted. Okay. So, but anyhow, we'll post something on the Tampa Bay Market Group, and I would like to get a nice group together. We're going to have a breakfast served. We're going to have some training, and we'll have a big surprise. So, all I can say is I invite you to come there, because there'll be a big opportunity to get something very, very nice, and that's all I'm going to say at this point. But you probably kick yourself if you miss it. So I'm driving down there from Sarasota, so there's really no excuse for anyone not to go down there. Another thing, and then I wrap this up, we're going to announce later this week a new training program. I know Tanya has done a lot of additional training on Teachable, and she'll address that herself. She'll send something out to everyone. But I also decided that I want to have a one-day boot camp new agent training program. At some point, we may charge a fee for that. Right now, just initially for the first couple of times, we are not going to charge a fee, except we will have lunch there. And so if somebody wants to have lunch, then we'll charge a small fee for the lunch, $10, $15, $20, whatever it is going to be. But it's going to be an all-day event, and it's broken into 2 chunks. The first chunk is dealing with using our systems and being proficient with using the CRM, the Commission Sync CRM, using .loop, using Workplace, using the tools that we have. And the second part is dealing with getting your business up and running. Creating a budget, creating a business plan for your business, setting some goals, and working with buyers and working with sellers and lead generation. And so it's going to be an all-day boot camp. And again, the first couple of ones, we will not charge. We may decide to charge after that, because there is significant cost involved with us putting that on. So the event is, we have to pay for the rent, the space. We have to compensate the people that are going to teach the classes. We're going to have lunch there. And I'm going to send out information on it. This event will be mandatory for new agents. So if a new agent joins under the novice program, where they're being assigned a mentor, they must complete that boot camp within 60 days. And they have to complete it. If somebody just comes and then they goof off or check their emails or they don't come back after lunch, then, you know, that's it. We will not count that as attendance. And when we roll out the first couple of ones, we're going to give preference to the new agents that need the most training. And then secondarily to new existing agents. And we'll send something out to you. Like I said, the first couple of ones are going to be free. But that being said, we will charge a deposit and you get it back when you come and attend the entire event. Because again, space is limited. I'm not going to be spending a bunch of money on renting space and then a bunch of people sign up and then nobody shows up, and that's just not fair. So those are the three announcements for today. And we got a few minutes left. So anyone that has any questions, please feel free to fire them off right now. Let me know.
I would like to state that the mentoring is a huge obligation too, because you got to be available for people, the new trainees. But it's really extremely rewarding for me and the trainees. But also, just to give you an idea, I think people are missing this. I'll be making at least 12 grand this month alone off my trainees. And I'm sorry, trainees, but they keep wanting me to help them. But I mean, that's a lot of money. So what if it only averaged 1,000 a month? You know, that's still a lot of money and you get to help someone build their business and learn to do the business correct. Now, you know, you feel like it's an accomplishment that you won't find anywhere else. This company's set up perfect for that. So why not mentor one or two people and make that extra? I bet you I'll put in 35 or 40 grand this year in my pocket from mentoring.
You know, you make a very good point. And actually, you know, one thing that Rick is doing and Tanya is doing as well, and you can do yourself as well, is to combine almost a quasi-team, a loose team structure with the mentoring program where, you know, the mentee, obviously they're responsible for getting their own business and so forth, but you may also be a lead source to them and provide them with some opportunities, and obviously you get a bigger chunk of their commission for that. And so you can do that. You know, a lot of people look at the team concept that it's like you know, all in or all out. You know, so either you build a team and then somebody works for you on the team, and they're going to only work through you, and you split the commission 50-50 or whatever the deal is. But a lot of agents that are having an overflow of opportunities, you know, why not partner with someone, and why not make it one of your new mentees where you say, you know what, I'm going to help you and you're going to work with me on a couple of transactions, and I'm having, you know, you're doing the work basically, but in exchange, we'll split the commission. So with Realty Partners, you have complete flexibility in doing so, you know. Good point, Rick. Absolutely. It's another form of leverage in essence, you know. Absolutely. I know David Jacobs has done very well with his mentoring program as well. It's a huge responsibility. I mean, you're going to be investing time, and moving forward, as we roll this out, we will actually, and Tanya suggested that, and I thought it was a fantastic suggestion, we are going to check in with the new agent after 30 days. And when I say we, actually I'm going to call them and talk to them. And I'm going to say, okay, how are things going for you with X? Okay. If they're not getting any support, they're not hearing from their mentor is not doing anything for them, then guess what? We'll assign them to a different mentor, because we want to make sure that that person actually gets the support and training that they need, that it's not just, you know, somebody signing off on someone so they can get maybe 10% on their transactions, but it really, you know, is going to require an investment. But you're contributing, you're giving, you're helping someone else and helping yourself in the process, and it's very, very rewarding. Okay, it is 9:58. Any last questions, or I will wrap this up? So
events. What are our events this week? Do we have one tomorrow?
Yes, we have an event tomorrow, and you're scheduled to be running it at the Regis Center in Tampa. And go to the events calendar that we have on joinrealtypartners.com/events.
I was a little confused because it looked like there's one on Thursday as well at the same location.
No, that was changed. It's Tuesday. It's tomorrow.
Okay.
And I would connect with Tanya, because I know Tanya is bringing some people there as well. And so, I don't care which of you ends up running the event, but yes, we have an event tomorrow in Tampa.
Thank you.
And then we have one on Thursday. We have Thursday.
Sarasota too, right?
Yes, actually we have, so tomorrow we have an event in Tampa. On Thursday, we have an event in Orlando that I'm hosting. And we have 2 events a week in Sarasota. We have every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. and every Thursday at 1:30 p.m. And now just note that you need to RSVP your guests. If we don't have any guests RSVP'd, then we'll cancel the event, because we're not going to spend money on the meeting room, et cetera, if no one is coming. So, either if you're lazy, have your people go to the webpage and sign up themselves and hope they'll do it. And many times they won't. And if we cancel the event and then they show up and there's no one there, then shame on you. Or just RSVP them yourself. I mean, if I talk to Sally and Sally says to me, absolutely, I want to come on Thursday, I'm not going to say to Sally, you know what, Sally, I'm going to email you a link so you can register. I'm just going to RSVP her right now myself, So, so I'll say, Sally, you know what, I'm going to RSVP her right now. You're going to get an email and text message with all the information. So I highly recommend you do that, because again, if we don't have anyone coming, we will cancel the event. But as it stands right now, we have 4 events scheduled this week. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and have a fantastic week.